Welcome to the program. We're going to talk a little bit, or actually we're going to talk at length about Nestle tonight. There's been some new things going on with them. It was in the news today. Cable's been doing a segment. Other stations have been doing segments. So we're going to talk a little bit about it with Julia DeGraw, who's been on the program more than once in the past, talking about this and other issues as well. But welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
All right, this is great. I know you were briefly on long story, but on Cable this morning, and what Think Out Loud had Alex of Brown from Bark, and this issue was just kind of just appeared out of nowhere to me. I didn't know that things were going on. But before we bring it up to date, we should talk a little bit about what's it been, 3 years now, 4 years?
5.5 years.
Oh, wow, 5.5 years.
Has been trying to bottle water in the gorge. So yeah.
All right, so yeah, kind of give us a little abbreviated synopsis of what the story is then.
Yeah. So about 5.5 years ago, Nestle was exploring water bottling prospects in the Northwest. If you were to look at a map of Nestle water bottling facilities, they don't have any water bottling facilities anywhere in the Northwest. The nearest one's in Canada, and then there's one in like the Southwest. So they really were seeking out new water resources, and they ended up getting a foothold in the town of Cascade Locks, Oregon, in the Columbia River Gorge. And right now, it's really the one location in the country where Nestle is trying to expand. And it's a really unique situation in which there are state agencies involved. So starting about 5.5 years ago, Food and Water Watch and Bark and a coalition of groups called Keep Nestle Out of the Gorge really started working hard to prevent a state agency, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, from going through a fairly complicated process to make public spring water available to Nestle in the gorge, which we think Nestle is one of the worst water bottling companies in the country. It's a privatization of a public common resource. They've done a lot of damage in communities, which we'll hear about later in the show. And we just really don't think that the Nestle should be able to gain power here over our water resources here in Oregon. And we especially don't think that a state agency should be involved in making this public water resource available to this multinational corporation with such a bad track record, and especially in a place as iconic and beautiful as the Columbia River Gorge.
Mm-hmm. So from what I understand, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to be trading some water for some water, something like that.
So yeah, this is where it gets complicated. I mean, people, we were on, Alex Brown was on Think Out Loud on OPB, and we had a cover story in the Oregonian on Monday about this issue. Up until now, the deal that Nestle had been pushing through for the town of Cascade Locks is to have the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, or ODFW, which currently uses Oxbow spring water for a fish hatchery. And it's the spring water that Nestle wants to gain access to. Nestle can charge more money for spring water. They currently bottle spring water in the western United States under the Arrowhead brand. Arrowhead is actually a Nestle product. Mm-hmm. And they charge more money for that than they charge for their Nestle Pure Life brand. And they plan to bottle both the Pure Life brand, which is just public tap water, basically, for cheaper. And they plan to bottle that in Cascade Locks, as well as the spring water that ODFW has the water rights to. And 5 years ago, the idea was, let's do a water exchange. And this water exchange would have allowed ODFW to fully retain its water right and the city of Cascade Locks to fully retain its water right. And they would just literally exchange physical water. And there is an application currently on file at the Water Resources Department that has not been processed yet, but that has thousands of public comments on it, of Oregonians calling on the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Oregon Water Resources Department to deny this permit for a water exchange. And this is really relevant, and it sounds super kind of complicated, but the bottom line is why that's so relevant is that the water rights, the water exchange application allows for a public interest review. And that's really important because it allows us to take the broadest look possible at the implications of Nestle bottling water in the gorge. It doesn't just look at what's best for ODFW and what's best for the city of Cascade Locks. It looks at what's best for the use of this public resource. And it's where we have kind of our strongest arguments, and it's where the public is the most concerned. Those thousands of comments that were submitted are people being concerned about what's best for the state of Oregon and for the public. This, over the end of last year, Nestle approached the city of Cascade Locks and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to go through with a water rights transfer, where they would actually exchange ownership of the water right with Cascade Locks, a portion of the water right.
Just a certain amount of what came out of the spring then.
It would be 0.5 CFS, basically, of ODFW's about 10 CFS water right, cubic feet per second. And that would it'd be an exchange of this permanent ownership of the water right. And what's really relevant about that is, first of all, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife said 5 years ago they would never entertain a water rights exchange. So it's interesting that now they're clearly entertaining the idea.
Some kind of pressure
they haven't
coming
said
in.
yes yet, but they haven't said no either. And the rationale, the reason why this is such a big problem is multi-tiered, but one of them is that the water rights transfer does not require a public interest review. So the number one concern that Oregonians have, and one of our strongest arguments on the water exchange, would be thrown out. And the water resources, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is a public state agency. They work for the public. The director, Curt Melcher, is a public servant. And for the agency to purposefully and knowingly circumvent the public interest review seems anathema to what this agency should be doing. And especially to do it at the behest of a multinational corporation that wants to profit off this public resource. So we really think at the very, very least they need to let this public interest review stand, but obviously ODFW should really just pull out of this proposal altogether because it's such an inappropriate use of this public resource. But this water rights transfer is such a big deal because it throws out the public interest review, and it also would cause the department to toss out the water exchange application, which is currently on file and has thousands of comments on it. That would throw out those thousands of comments as well, which is really disrespectful to the thousands of Oregonians who've expressed their concerns about this proposal and about that specific application. So, and there's also this concept that it will fast track the water bottling facility, but there's no real evidence, especially from the Water Resources Department, that this water rights transfer will speed things up. There's still another water transfer application that has to be processed about ODFW's water right before they can really move forward with any kind of water exchange. So it really does appear to be just an attempt to circumvent the public interest review, which is really inappropriate for a public state agency.
Which is what's been holding us up all along, was that people know about it. But you know, I'm not fully clear on this. There has been this water exchange going on all along. Now, why all of a sudden is it possible that it might get thrown out?
It might get thrown out because if they apply for a water transfer, a water rights transfer, it eliminates the need for a water exchange, because the water rights transfer would actually, it would mean that the city would own 0.5 cubic feet per second of ODFW's water right, and they would just have rights to use it. And the same thing would happen in reverse. So what would happen on the ground is not necessarily that physically different, but the process by which it happens would be different. And also, it would be the state agency giving up a portion of its public water right to the municipality, which is very different than just exchanging physical water. I know it sounds like semantics, but it is.
Not when the rubber hits the road, it's not.
No, it's not. And the tossing out of the public interest review is a really big deal. I mean, that is that you know, this is our only chance on this project, because the state of Oregon doesn't have an Environmental Protection Act like they have in California and Washington. Our only chance of getting any kind of really in-depth review of this proposal outside of a very narrow scope of, you know, what ODFW and Cascade Locks thinks is best. The only way we get a broader review of this process is through that public interest review. And we really, and over 65, I mean, thousands, tens of thousands of Oregonians don't view this as your run-of-the-mill water rights transfer. You know, what someone from ODFW might say is like, it's just a water rights transfer. We do these every day. This is not a big deal. When your third party and ostensible partner is Nestle, and they want to bottle that water for their private profit and have it go overseas, and they want to do it in one of the most scenic, iconic areas in the state, that's not your run-of-the-mill water rights transfer. And we really think that this kind of a water exchange requires and should warrant a higher level public review process.
Not less of one.
And not less of one. And it really is, there's been a lack of leadership, not just from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. The governor at any point in time could have weighed in here as well and listened to the, I mean, in the last 5.5 years, we've frankly not able to keep track of the number of actions that have been taken, but between BARC and Food and Water Watch alone, I mean, we're talking about 85,000 Oregonians who voiced their concerns on this issue that we know of. And that's with letters to the governor, public comments to the Oregon Water Resources Department, phone calls to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, you name it. 85,000 Oregonians have voiced a concern about this. So to pretend that that concern is irrelevant and to just circumvent this public interest review is really a slap in the face to Oregonians and public trust, you know, the public trust doctrine that we hold our water to in the state.
Well, I see up on this on the graphic there. Keep Nestle out, WordPress.com, and foodandwaterwatch.org, and then barkout.org. But that top one there is where people can go, especially those who have already sent comments in and they're in danger of being, you know, just disregarded. You need to send some more in, right?
Right.
I mean, you can do that through that top.
Right. If you click through to that website, the keepnestleout.wordpress.com website, there is a post that has the phone number for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the governor's office, and a link you can click through to so you can send a personalized message to both the governor and the current director of ODFW to ask them to pull out of this proposal altogether, but especially to not allow this water rights transfer to move forward because it is so, you know, counter to public water.
To how they've been, how the process has been going on along.
Right.
Apparently it was too sluggish, and some smart lawyer in Cascade Locks or the Nestle realized they could just change that one word and that one process, because I know that Cascade Locks wants to do this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's complicated too. There's that was another thing that wasn't the Think Out Loud interview was very short, and we weren't able to get into depth about it. But David Miller did bring up this issue of like how much opposition is there to this project in Cascade Locks. And as a person who's attended almost every, if not every single public meeting that Nestle has held in that community, I've seen the people show up and ask really challenging questions of Nestle. Local people, people who live in Cascade Locks, and to say that there is this blanket support or blind support for this proposal is really untrue. The leadership has really kind of been, you know, convinced by Nestle that this is a good idea for their town, but the actual town people are wary of their leadership and are really skeptical. You know, they want the jobs, they want to see corporate development in their town, you know, for the sake of jobs, but they're really wary about 200 truck trips a day. You know, they're really concerned about a corporation with a really bad track record, and they are concerned about the lack of, you know, the town asking Nestle really difficult questions. I mean, the town is going to be offering the water to any corporate user for less than the going rate. You know, and their argument is, well, you know, we'll make up. You know, these companies will buy more water if it's cheaper. Nestle's going to bottle the amount of water that the market demands. No more and no less. And they're going to do it at whatever the going rate is, you know. So I think the town is very concerned about the process by which this is moving forward, and is wary about this multinational corporation moving in. And that doesn't really get expressed a lot because the only place it really comes up is these Nestle town hall meetings and occasionally in city council meetings. But just because they're not rallying in the streets against this proposal doesn't mean that there's a broad base of support there either. And on top of that, there's a lot of opposition throughout the gorge. And if you look at what Nestle does in Denver, Colorado, and in other locations, they ship water from other locations to the water bottling facilities. And if you think about spring water, which is their goal here, the gorge is full of spring water. So these communities that surround Cascade Locks are really concerned and not supportive.
The precedent, yeah.
You know, because they're concerned that their water will be next once Nestle opens up shop. So.
Sure. You know, that you mentioned that, I don't think this has been mentioned, but bottling it just doesn't come out of the hillside and they hold a water bottle underneath it. They're building a bottling plant.
Yep. So
that's part of those 200 trucks is bringing in all the plastic and all the and then the shipping in the because they make the bottles there and they're going to ship them out on truck.
Yep. The trucks will come in carrying the little like pellets they use to make the water bottles, and they'll move out with a truck full of water. Bottled water. And the other thing, I'm glad you mentioned this because this was something that came up during one of the town hall meetings that Nestle held. One of their footprints right there along the Columbia River is going to be really large water storage facilities that are, you know, depending on which model they use, 30 to 60 feet tall. And so people who really, you know, want to see more economic development in their hometown in Cascade Locks are really concerned about this massive industrial complex that might be an eyesore and has 200 truck trips a day. So there's a lot of unanswered questions in Cascade Locks. I don't think it's a done deal in terms of, you know, 100% of community support. But I think that it's also really important that we, because that, you know, on Think Out Loud, there was a lot of kind of pressure to take this. Take in the idea that it's a local issue, but when you're dealing with a state agency and a water right at a state agency level, that water is owned by all Oregonians. You know, it's a state water issue. We all have a say in what happens with our water, and the Columbia River Gorge is a place that's iconic to all Oregonians, and we all care about it and have a say in what happens there. So it's not purely about a local decision-making process. It is definitely about having a statewide review and public interest.
Sure. And on top of that, even though unfortunately it's not an issue, you know, the whole country owns that water since it's really coming out of the national forest. Although unfortunately, it's where it comes out of the forest is state land, or
it's Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Right.
So yeah, that would be state land. That is actually interesting. During one of the very first meetings that Nestle had, they made it really clear that they had no interest in having any kind of infrastructure on the Forest Service land because they didn't want to go through a NEPA process, an environmental review, and it was interesting to hear them say that because they publicly claim to be so concerned about their impacts and their investment in the community, but they don't even want to do an environmental review.
Yeah, that's totally understandable that they would want to not do that. It's you know, I can see that we've been talking a lot just about the process, but the fact that you mentioned the distillery or whatever they call that, the terminal where the water is bottled up. You mentioned 200 trucks. Have they even mentioned, they meaning Nestle, the infrastructure, impacts on infrastructure? 200 trucks a day is going to tear the hell out of those roads.
Well, and it is, just to be fair, it's 200 truck trips a day because that's how they measure it. So it's like 100 trucks a day, which is still huge. It's a very large number of trucks, and it would be back and forth trips, and that's why they call them 200 truck trips. The current infrastructure cannot withstand that level of traffic.
I sure wouldn't think so. No.
And so what again, this is something, a lot of this information comes out of these public meetings, and you can go look these up online as well. Like they're pretty well documented. But what Dave Pillay, Nestle's representative, has said at these public meetings is that they will not invest in the infrastructure of Cascade Locks. So basically the way that works, if it's an ODOT road, is that Oregon taxpayers are going to subsidize building up those roads so that Nestle can run their 200 truck trips on it a day.
I had a feeling that was coming.
Yeah,
that's why I asked.
Like we're going to be subsidizing this multinational corp. And that's the other thing they also mentioned. There was an economist who started doing an economic study for Nestle, and he did a presentation on this during a public meeting in Cascade Locks, and he mentioned that of all the profits that Nestle is going to make, for this water bottling endeavor, only 10% of it would stay in the region. So not only are we going to have to pay to maintain and upgrade these roads, but we don't even get to see the benefit of the profits of this corporation staying within the state.
Right, and then what is it, Switzerland? So the majority of the profits are going to go out of the country, let alone the state.
Yeah, exactly, precisely.
So that's an issue. Well, I was on the internet and I found a couple of videos. We're going to play a little bit of it. I found one that I forget what it was. It was some city or area up in Ontario, Canada. It's about a 4-minute clip. And this is a local issue, but this has been going on for some time, whether it was in Canada or Michigan. There was another one on India, what's going on in India with the trying to bottle their water. So this little 4-minute clip, we'll check that out and then come back.
am at the Nestle bottling facility located in Aberfoyle, Ontario, just 15 minutes south of my hometown of Guelph, Ontario. The issue that we are currently facing in our local communities is a permit that was passed just last month, stating that Nestle can drain up to 4.7 million liters of water a day from our local underground well. That's the equivalent to 50,000 people taking a 5-minute shower every day. Local spokesperson Cindy Davidson said that there should be no adverse effects for the local communities and surrounding communities around Nestle's power plant. However, have they considered the long-term effects? In just 1 year, 1.7 billion liters of water will drain from our underground water resources. How will that affect our communities in the long run? On top of all the water they are draining from the ground, the waste Nestle produces is tremendous and is greatly harming the environment. Step 1. Change my own habits so I can change the habits of others. That includes stop using plastic water bottles, filtering my own water at home, and refusing to use Nestle products. Step 2. Make a website to create awareness about this issue. The website will include the following information: background about the issue, petition to stop Nestle from draining the wells, pictures and facts, information on how the public can help, and an input page where people can share their ideas about the issue. Ideally, the website will inform the public about Nestle's new permit and promote more sustainable alternatives to plastic water bottles, such as tap water and reusable bottles. Step 3. Create a petition addressing the issue signed by the community members and present it to the City of Guelph. The petition will try to reduce the amount of water Nestle is allowed to extract and hopefully stop the draining altogether. The issue with Nestle is not only are they draining our community's underground water resources, their company is also contributing to a mass amount of pollution worldwide. I'm creating awareness in my community by promoting the tap and encouraging people to say no to Nestle. This way, we will be creating a more water-wise, sustainable city for us to live in now and in the future.
Public access. I'm moving on. I forget. All right, well, welcome back. As you see, it isn't just what's going on in the gorge. Nestle has been trying to grab water from a lot of different places. I know there's a small town named McLeod just down there out of Mount Shasta, and it's not no progressive leftist community. That area down there, you know, very staunch Republican area, and they said no. They stopped them, and I don't think the folks in that town have ever been activated about anything, and they have an idyllic existence down there. But they saw the dangers, and that was a very well put together little video showing the dangers of what was happening to that town in Canada. And to me, the first thing I get out of it, or the main thing I get out of it, is the people's right to water. And Julie and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, that you know, water is a human right.
Yeah. I mean, precisely, and that's the #1 reason why FINA Water Watch is engaged in water bottling as an issue, is that, I mean, really, as historically speaking, water has always been considered a public common resource. I mean, even under the Middle Ages, water was considered this public resource, and that was not exactly an enlightened time, you know.
No,
like,
and you could be killed for killing the king's deer back then.
Right, exactly.
You know?
But you could fish in the river and you could drink his water, and this is going back to Roman times. Water was defined as this public, kind of unownable resource. And right now, we're trying to have it both ways globally. You know, the United Nations defines water as both a commodity and as a public resource and as a human right. They just recently passed the human right to water. But if you look at all the documents in the UN, they're trying to have it both ways. And you really, all the water crises in the world of people who don't have access to clean water, that's not because of a lack of clean water. It's because of lack of public will, and often a case of privatization or corporate control of these public resources. So it's really a huge problem, and allowing a state agency to really open the doors to this kind of abuse of this most essential resource is really inappropriate. I mean, in Oregon, we have this incredible opportunity to stop Nestle from opening up shop anywhere in the state by sending a really strong message. And it's been 5.5 years. You know, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and the governor's office have seen how much opposition there is, and they know that this isn't a popular proposal and that it's not going to be ultimately good for Oregon citizens or the gorge, and it's just time that they put a stop to it.
And they can do so by going to that website right there on top. I imagine Bark's got a connection too to send in emails and call the governor, but
it's actually Bark's Action that's on the website.
It is. All right, so either one there.
Yep. If you just click through the link on the blog, it goes to Bark's Action. So yeah, that's it's going to take everyone taking a stand on this, and it's going to take our state agencies really, you know, standing up for the public interest here and doing what's right for Oregonians and for this public resource, and not bowing to corporate interest.
Sure. And it just seems to me that I always try to connect up issues to other issues, and this issue connects up very, very completely to the energy issue. I mean, because of the situation with plastics come from petroleum, and well, here we are going to be encouraging more drilling, more petroleum, and to me that is, you know, the gal in the video talked a little bit about the wastage of 88% of how many billions of bottles a year are going to be wasted, and that's just encouraging more drilling. It's not working towards a sustainable economy, which Oregon tries to present itself as working in that direction.
Right. And it's really funny because within my lifetime, bottled water has become this multi-billion-dollar industry. When I was a kid, you know, I drank out of hoses, you know, like garden hoses, and I drank out of water fountains at the park, and I brought water bottles to soccer practice like that. Like it was normal. You had the big igloo, like you know, containers of water, and it's really interesting when Food and Water Watch has a program called Take Back the Tap, where we're trying to take on the kind of demand side of this supply and demand equation by getting universities and municipalities to ban the sale of bottled water. And it's so interesting, where we run into the most pushback is with athletic departments, because they will claim, and an administration full of people much older than myself will claim that they can't possibly have sporting events without bottled water. And I'm thinking, you used to, in your own lifetime, you would have sporting events without bottled water. I think we know how to do this, right? We have a way. So it's really incredible how much the industry has manufactured demand and kind of convinced people that bottled water, you know, is this necessary part of their daily lives, when really we were doing without as recently as 30 years ago. 20 years ago.
Well, no, 50 years ago we were doing without fast food too.
Well.
And to me, it's the exact same mechanism. I mean, it starts out as something that's a luxury or convenience, because I've gone to meetings and I've gone to conferences and things with, you know, really progressive people concerned about the earth, and they're handing out water bottles because of the convenience.
Well, and because they think that it's healthier than soda, right? And it's like, well, We can have glasses, we can have reusable like water bottles. There's so many ways around it.
That's where the convenience comes in, and it
Right.
starts out being convenient, and then it ultimately ends up becoming a luxury, and it becomes habitual. I see people walking out of Fred Meyer's all the time with cases of water,
Right.
and it's no better, and in some cases maybe not even as good as our Bull Run water.
Right. Well, that's actually another thing that I think is really worth mentioning right now, which is that the bottled water industry it's not so new anymore, but it's still new enough or powerful enough. The companies that do bottled water are powerful enough that they basically have still managed to go unregulated. And I think this is worth mentioning.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can talk. So the gist is your public water, your municipal water source is highly regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. They test the water here in Portland 300 and some odd times a month. If they find a contaminant, they have to notify the public within 24 hours, and they have to fix the problem. And they publish a report every year notifying the water users what kind of contaminants they're finding and at what levels. And it's every contaminant that they're required to test for from the EPA, which is a lot. The bottled water industry is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And they have less than, the stat is unclear, but they have definitely less than 2 full-time staff people regulating the entire multi-billion-dollar industry. And furthermore, if a water bottler is bottling water within the state that they're selling, the Food and Drug Administration only regulates interstate commerce. So, companies that are bottling water, like Earth2O, which is bottling water here in Oregon and sells that water within Oregon, that water doesn't fall under any regulation. The FDA isn't even regulating it. And we don't have state laws on bottled water. So we're just taking, like Nestle and Coca-Cola and Pepsi's word for it that this water is safe. And the FDA requires that they test 6 times a month, 3 times prior to bottling, and 3 times on the finished product. Those tests are not public information. You can't usually gather that information from a public interest request, and it's not reviewed by anybody from the FDA. So they're basically private tests that are impossible to access that may or may not be happening. So really, and on top of that, it's in a plastic bottle. So even if the water is clean and safe going into the bottle, there are issues with the plastic leaching, people leaving their water bottles in trunks of cars under less than ideal conditions, and there are a lot of issues associated with the plastic alone in terms of public health. A lot of estrogen mimicking chemicals can be leached from plastic. But furthermore, there have been independent tests done on bottled water, and they have contamination issues. That this myth that it's pristine and clean and really processed water is unfounded. It's not true. Whereas your public water systems are being very forthright with their quality between the testing and the fact that they have to be public with all the information.
Sure.
Your tap water is definitely higher regulated and safer to drink.
I remember a while back, I think somebody urinated in the water here in Portland, then they had to shut it down for a while.
Well, they drained the reservoir.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
And that what's that going to be? And then however many hundreds of thousands of gallons. I mean, it's not going to be contaminated by the time it gets to anybody, but they're going to err on the side of caution.
Well, and actually, that's another really good example. The level of proof that needs to be attained before a water bottler will be held accountable for making someone sick is that someone has to actually get sick. So, and then they have to be able to connect that illness to that specific water bottle.
Which is difficult.
So, which is very, very difficult to do. With the public water, a really good example is when we've had a couple of E. coli scares in the Oregon in Portland's water, and it wasn't because someone got sick. It's because they had 2 positive tests within a certain amount of time of really not cryptosporidium. We've never had a positive test. But this is just regular like E. coli that a strand that wouldn't even make you that ill if you were to get exposed to it. But the statute for your public water system is if you find it in the system, you issue a boil water alert, and you drain the reservoir and you fix the problem. You don't wait till someone gets sick and have it reported. You find a contamination and you fix it. If Nestle or a water bottler were to find contamination and knowingly put it in the bottle, they wouldn't be breaking the law until someone gets sick from it, right? And that's what's really
Until someone reports getting sick.
And someone and it's proven that they got sick from it, which is like, I mean, think about the number of things you're exposed to on a regular basis that could make you sick. It'd be very hard to prove. Sure, that's understandable, and it's a really high bar for one and a really low bar for the other, it seems like. Right. Well, another aspect of this we haven't covered is the reputation of Nestle. They got a lousy reputation, and we got a little clip. There was a woman named Swigert? Terry Swear.
Terry Swear, who was the problem she had trying to fight Nestle in was Michigan, right? Yeah, Mecosta, Michigan. And Nestle got through the door, and they opened up one there, and they had nothing but serious issues. And it's a 9-minute clip that she was speaking here in Portland. We'll just play some of it to just give folks an idea, like with Canada, that this is an ongoing battle, and this is just one front of many.
Our next speaker is Terry Swear, who traveled all the way from Michigan to be with us today. She's a founding member and former president of Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation, a nonprofit grassroots group located in north central Michigan. She's appeared in acclaimed documentaries such as Flow and Blue Gold, and the group she founded in Michigan has engaged in over 8 years of fighting to protect waters of the Great Lake Basin against Nestle's bottling plans.
I am so glad to see all of you here today. It's great. Just keep going together. Let's save the water in Cascade Locks. I live in Mecosta, a small town in northern Michigan. It's located in one of the poorest counties. 48.5% of students attending K through 12 receive free or reduced lunches, and 29% of the families are below poverty level. I understand the economic and job situation that is also facing the people of Cascade Locks and other small communities, and how Nestle is trying to convince the public that it's moving into the area will change that. Let me tell you, it doesn't happen. Right. As Nestle moved into Michigan to privatize our water for its own profit, it announced that there would be no adverse impact to the natural resources. And Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation believed then, and it has been proven in the courts, that irreparable harm would occur to the waterways due to pumping by Nestle. Nestle came into Michigan 2 years before residents heard of the plan to withdraw 263 million gallons of spring water per year, divert it, bottle, and sell Nestle's brand, which is Ice Mountain, out of the watershed in Michigan. Nestle spent those 2 years meeting with Michigan government officials, from the governor to the local officials. Upon hearing of Nestle's plan 12 years ago, I helped form the grassroots organization, Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation. And I was its president for 11 years and now serve on its board. Along with Mecosta, Nestle actively pursued other spring water sources, and it now trucks municipal spring water in bulk from another small community about 30 miles from its existing plant. Now I would like to ask, has your governor turned a blind eye like Michigan's governor did to the private international company Nestle, who is here for its own profit and not for the citizens' benefit?
Hey, show me a governor! I want to see a governor that has
If we do not let our voices be heard from the local to state level and higher, we could lose our rights to our waters to private companies like Nestle. Through the efforts of MCWC, lawsuits were filed against Nestle to preserve our water rights in the Great Lakes Basin. It is not reasonable for a large foreign corporation to take the water from the land and communities like Cascade Locks and other small towns. Water seems to go to whoever has the most money, and there are no incentives for conservation because the more water you take, the more money you make. Nestle was cautioned by the trial judge that it proceeded at its own risk in building its plant. True to form, Nestle pushed ahead in its building of the plant and continued to threaten the possible loss of jobs as a way to strong-arm Michigan's governor and legislators. Nestle claimed to be a good neighbor company to our area, yet it continued to pump at high rates during a long period of low participation and lower recharge, even when there were dramatic impacts and damage to lakes, streams, and wetlands. Lives have changed for the people in Mecosta and the members of Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation since Nestle came to Michigan. The issues have pitted neighbor against neighbor, and friendships have been severed. Nestle has violated our lives directly and indirectly with telephone polling, private investigators, FBI visits to our homes, and a threatened SLAPP suit, which is a strategic lawsuit against public participation against my son. Nestle has affected my family and others emotionally, physically, mentally, and financially. MCWC could not afford expensive lobbyists or PR agents like Nestle, but with strength of morals, heart, and loyalty, MCWC has and will continue to make Nestle accountable for the export of Michigan's waters. Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation spent well over $1.5 million on its lawsuit against Nestle, and we have to continue to fundraise to pay our legal and environmental expert bills. I do not want to see this to happen to other private citizens. From my own experience, I know that Nestle fights to get what it wants. Nestle continued to fight the David and Goliath battle with Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation for over 9 years. However, with our perseverance, we won the court case against Nestle by reducing its pumping by nearly half. Nestle also agreed to lower its string pumping earlier during fish spawning and continue low pumping during the summer months to take care of the stress to the already stressed streams and lakes. Even though we won, the lakes and streams will never be the same. I would caution the residents of Oregon to ask hard questions of Nestle and its elected or appointed government officials, and don't take Nestle's word for anything. Water grabbers like Nestle undermines the interest of our sixth-generation residents who live on the lakes, streams, and the public that fishes, boats, swims, and enjoys our lakes and streams. The farmers who rely on our groundwater and industry, our economy, and the tourist industry that are so dependent on our water. Water is our heritage and our culture. It must be protected for future generations, not only in Michigan or here, but around the world. Margaret Mead said it better than than I ever could. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. You are there to do it. Thank you very much.
Sharing this land and its bounty with you, conquering greed and the corporate speak. Our water she holds for the many, not few. 2 bottles of plastic, we all say PU.
All right, I forgot that was at the end there.
I'd forgotten about that wonderful moment.
That
yes.
was great. That was good. PU. Well, you know, this has been played just to demonstrate, you know, the corporate mentality of profits before people, and I don't think that they probably have changed their tactics. Their track record speaks for itself, and as you were saying, you can speak to some of that.
Yeah, and something that I think we need to keep in mind is that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife doesn't have a lot to gain from this water exchange proposal. And if they're going to be counting on water during the driest summer months, you know, to be coming from Cascade Locks, which is also going to be trying to meet Nestle's water demands, say we have a really low snowpack year, which we're set on record to have right now.
35% of our snowpack
One
right
of the
now.
lowest snowpacks, you know, there's this big question of, do you really think, no matter what you have in terms of a contract with the city of Cascade Locks, that if there's a water shortage, that Nestle's going to let the fish come first? I mean, there's, you know, never has Nestle seemed to let any other water use come before its own. So, I mean, it's a very high risk endeavor for the state agency unto itself, without even taking into account the fact that, as Terry mentioned, Nestle was shipping water from 30 miles away. You know, we really need to be looking at the impacts to the entire gorge, not just this small section of it.
And one must remember that the corporate structure is such that it would be against the law for them to make decisions that would put people before their profits. They have to show a profit to their shareholders, and I don't understand all the in and outs of those laws and regulations, but they're within their rights to continue pumping, I think, probably back in Michigan.
Well, and what's interesting with, well, that's what ended up, I mean, the lower court decided it was against the law what they were doing, but then they appealed it, and the Supreme Court of Michigan made a very controversial decision to let Nestle continue pumping. And then Nestle countersued and made it illegal for anyone in the state of Michigan to sue them unless their individual property had been damaged. So this is the corporation we're talking about. But something I also think is relevant is that in Michigan, they gained the water right in that area. Here, they are going to be a municipal water user in the town of Cascade Locks. And people think, oh, well, that's great. You know, they're going to be paying money for it. But they are abdicating their responsibility to the environmental impacts in that community by being a water user, a purchaser of the water. So if anything were to go wrong, if they were to overdraw the aquifer in that town, if there were a water shortage, and the town had to decide how to deal with that, they would owe Nestle whatever amount of water that Nestle was contracted to get. And if that water shortage was because of Nestle's practices, Nestle wouldn't be held accountable. The town would have to make it right. So it really means that Cascade Locks is assuming much more risk by Nestle being a municipal water, by Nestle being a water purchaser. So they're doing a lot of things differently in Oregon that actually help them avoid responsibility.
Well, you know, they come into these cities and they whisper sweet nothings in people's ears, but they sure don't whisper what could happen down the road. And like what happened there, and some of the, you know, that may never happen here, but at the same time, we understand what the corporate mentality is and where their allegiance lies, and it lies to their bottom line, not to the community that they're pretending to care about.
Right. And that's precisely true. I mean, and I think another really good example of this is Maine. I mean, Nestle came into Maine and started bottling water in a few communities, and Freiburg is a really prime example of this. They've sued the town of Freiburg, Maine 5 separate times and lost every time, but they were doing it just to basically bankrupt the town.
They got the pockets, yeah.
And the thing is, now there are communities across the state of Maine that are passing resolutions to protect themselves from water bottling companies. And that's the thing. Like, once Nestle has established their reputation in a state, people get smart and start saying no. But like, since that hasn't really happened here in Oregon yet, we don't have that basis of communities who have been damaged by Nestle, so it's been harder to get that kind of support at the local level. But the bottom line is that statewide, in places like Maine, where Nestle has a really bad track record, people in communities that desperately need jobs are coming out and saying no to water bottling because of how badly it has worked in so many communities throughout that state. Sure.
I don't want to get too far afield, even though this isn't really a far afield. When you're talking about, being brought to court and all that, well, if these states put laws on the books to protect themselves from this sort of thing, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership goes through, this is an international corporation, they could sue, say, whatever state we were talking about. Say you were talking about Maine. Maine would be forced to throw those laws out or face being sued by, say, Nestle or whoever in an international court, and these courts never, ever find against the corporation.
Yeah, the Trans-Pacific Partnership would just undermine kind of all local decision-making potentially, whether it's for a GMO ban of GMO crops in Jackson County, or whether labeling, and it's like there's a that's a whole other story for sure.
But it's a parallel story.
Yeah, we need to make sure we win on TPP so we can have wins like stopping Nestle in the Gorge. But yeah, like we need to be able to stand up for our communities and say no to these corporate interests.
And we have to do it on an international level as well.
Yep.
Which is what, and unfortunately, our president thinks this is a great idea, which for some reason presidents in this country love trade deals, and it's unfortunate. But we got down to 6 minutes. I want to encourage folks to maybe give us a call if you got any questions, because this is a large issue, and it's a complicated issue until you get into looking at it real close. And it's the old profit before people's, and unfortunately this particular corporation has got a lousy track record, and they're not going to end up doing what they say they're going to do, we believe. And there's so many other issues with the plastics and the petroleum and the infrastructure of the roads, and there's so many reasons why. And then, the main reason we talked about at the beginning was the whole procedure and the policies that were involved in this, that it's a bad idea. And we want to, we're down to 5 minutes. We want to reiterate the websites up there that folks can get a hold of, the information and the places that you can go to weigh in on this. A lot of you, how many? 80,000 you said weighed in already?
At least 85,000 people have taken action. It's hard to keep track because people send letters and we can't keep track of that. There have been a lot of individual letters sent to the governor's office.
That weren't sent through the various websites or whatever.
But we know from what we can measure that it's at least 85,000 Oregonians have taken some kind of action on this campaign throughout its inception. And the other thing to keep in mind too is this is a really, crucial moment for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. They really should not take advantage of this water rights transfer at the expense of the public interest review. They need to be a good public servant and at least allow the broadest assessment of this proposal to be taken before it moves forward. But do we have a call?
I see the flashing light. We have a call. First call. Oh, looks like we might have lost them there. First call is kind of bumpy sometimes, but remember that these things go through unless the people stand up.
Right.
The people lead, the leaders will follow, and unfortunately that's usually the case. Unless they get a lot of corporate money, then they said to hell with the people. And it was $890 billion that the Koch brothers are putting into the next 2016 election. We're always up against the deep pockets, like she just said. Sued some cities 6 times just to break them, and that's a terrible thing. And hopefully this caller will get back to us. We're down to we got 4 minutes still. There's a lot of room for questions, a lot of room for comments, and we'd like to hear either one. So with a little bit of time left, is there anything we didn't cover? There's a lot that we did cover.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, I think we need to not shy away from making this about the broader issue as water as a public resource. You know, we are, you know, as climate change is already happening, and at this point, it's about mitigation, what we can do to stop it from getting as bad as it can get. Like, we're going to have major issues globally regarding water resources. And the more we allow corporations to define how water is managed and who has access, the less the less water is going to be available to poor people. The less water is going to be available as a right. You know, people, and I think that we should not say, well, you know, it's different in the gorge. Water commodification or privatization of water is a problem anywhere and everywhere that it happens, and we absolutely need to make sure that we, especially when you have the opportunity to access a state agency, we should be able to, that's when it's the most important time for our state agencies to take a stand as water is a public resource and protect it from this corporate abuse.
That's very true, and you know, we might take into consideration that maybe Oregon won't have a drought, but there are other states and parts of this country that will, and where they're going to go? They're going to go where there's water.
William, there's even neighboring communities not too far east in the gorge that are already having water shortages. Melcher is not a particularly wet place, and that's something to consider is if you know, as people move to Oregon because of the fact that we might have a less of an impact during the climate change crisis, we're going to need water for people, not water for Nestle's bottling, right? And then I think that's something we need to think about is who takes precedence of this precious resource when the going gets tough. And the more we allow corporations to gain control and access to water, the less we're going to be able to protect that resource for the public good into the future. And for fish as well. I mean, for fish and wildlife and people, you know, water is a public resource because we know that public municipalities are going to prioritize providing water to people. Corporations are going to emphasize profits, and that doesn't make them bad, but that just makes them private. And this is precisely why water has never been perceived as a private commodity until very recently, because civilization kind of depended on water just being something that people had access to.
Sure. Without water, there's no civilization.
Exactly.
And that's something that needs to be factored in. Well, I'm glad you did mention salmon there, because that's an important part of the issue to me is our impact on the planet and the wildlife, and there's so many impacts that is being impressed upon the earth that we need to take stock of what's going on and realize that the future could bring some real serious problems, and we have a chance to head off some of those issues by not allowing the things that are necessary for life to be commodified. And that is going on, especially commodified in such a way that it accentuates the footprint that we were putting on the earth to begin with.
Right.
So we got 30 seconds. Go to that. What was the name of that website again?
KeepNestleOut.wordpress.com. You can take action there, and we're going to keep it updated so you can know what's going on.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. Especially want to thank you, Julie, for coming on. We'll bring you back on in the future and do updates.
Thank you.
And wish we had a phone call, but I guess everybody was busy dialing the phone to get on there and talk to the governor. So we'll see you next week.